Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. This is Isaiah 7b. That's Isaiah chapter 7, the second podcast. And this is Saul Weinreb, your host for this podcast. Today we are going to study a very famous prophecy of Isaiah, but one that the commentaries over the centuries have had an extremely difficult time explaining. One famous verse has been the subject of much Jewish Christian polemics over the centuries, and though I will of course touch on this issue, it will be only brief. Enough ink has been spilled over this particular verse that I don't have that much to add. It is my contention that in the search for the meaning of this prophecy, and in the search for a specific event that Isaiah was prophesying about, that the true meaning and beauty of his words kind of got lost in the debates and discussion. My focus will therefore be on trying to bring out what Isaiah was really trying to say. Some of my suggestions are somewhat new and novel, and although I have discussed them with some of the great rabbinical experts on the prophets, and have so far gotten good reviews, I would love to know what your comments are. The platform and the style of this will also be somewhat different than usual. I'm going to start today by reading verses 10 through 17 of chapter 7. I'll translate them and raise the issues that the commentators have dealt with, some of the difficulties in some of their explanations. But then I will end today with a list of the outstanding and unresolved issues of the chapter. Then in the next podcast, I will present my interpretation and an explanation of these issues. So let's begin with verse 10. Vayosef Adonai daber el Ahaz lemar, and God spoke further to Ahaz. Remember that in the beginning of this chapter, Isaiah was sent to a field, a laundry field, where he was supposed to meet the king and deliver the message to Ahaz, in which he told Ahaz, do not be afraid of the two kings that are attacking you. You don't need to do anything. Sit tight, and certainly don't go to someone else, another powerful king, for help, because God will help you. But apparently Ahaz ignored this advice. So Yeshayahu continues and speaks to Ahaz, saying, now, when it states over here that God spoke to Ahaz, this is all universally understood to mean that he spoke to Ahaz through the words of the prophet, and this is a common way of referring to when the prophet speaks in the name of God to someone throughout the words of the prophets and the writings. He says as follows: Sha'al lecha os me'im Adonai elecha ha'amek she'ala o hagbe alimala. So Isaiah says to Ahaz, are you not listening to me because you want some sort of magical sign or miracle? Well, if that's the case, go ahead. Ask me for a sign, whether it's a sign from deep down in the earth or a sign from way up in the heavens. Ask me for a sign and I'll prove to you. Vayomer Ahaz, and Ahaz answered, Lo eshal v'lo anaseh Adonai. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I don't want to give God a test. This is variously interpreted. Some commentaries understand this as Ahaz showing false humility, saying, I don't want to test God. Others understand it as simply refusing a sign because he has already decided that he wasn't going to obey God's wishes anyway. As we know from the book of Kings, that by this time he had already sold out the kingdom of Judah by capitulating to the Assyrian king and begging the Assyrian king for protection, which is exactly what Yeshayahu didn't want him to do. At this point, Yeshayahu clearly senses that Ahaz has chosen another path and has already sold out the people to Assyria. Vayomer, and he said, Shimuna Beit David, listen up, house of David. Here, Yeshayahu calls Ahaz house of David, which is insulting because he's basically stating, you Ahaz, you're nothing on your own. The only reason why you're there as king is because you happen to have an illustrious great-grandfather named David. Hama'at mikem halaos anashim, you've tired all of us people out. You've exhausted us by selling us out. Gam talu, ki talu, Gam et Elohai, are you also selling out God now? You think God isn't powerful enough to carry out his messages and carry out his wishes? Lachain, therefore, yitain Adonai hu lachem ot. God is going to give you a sign. Hinei ha'alma hara, a young girl has, behold, she has gotten pregnant, violet bain, she will deliver a son. v'karat shemo Immanuel, and she will call him God is with us, Immanuel. This particular verse is one that has been the topic of so much discussion. Over many centuries, Christians have mistranslated the word Alma as meaning a virgin, and then they assume this was a reference to the birth of their God. Clearly, this is a mistranslation. Even a rudimentary knowledge of the Hebrew language would be enough to know that the word Alma means a young girl and has nothing to do with her being a virgin or not. Like I said, I don't need to spend too much time on this because there is so much written about it. But I am going to come back to the meaning of this verse soon, because I do feel that the true meaning of this verse has been very much overlooked. So let's continue. Chema udvash yochel, he is going to eat butter and honey. Ma'os barau b'char batov, he is going to turn away from evil and choose good. Ki b'terem yedah hanar ma'os barau b'char batov, but even before he's old enough to have the knowledge to turn away from evil and choose good. The land that you're so afraid of, the nation that you're so afraid of because of those two kings who are attacking you, that land will be desolated. Those two kings will be destroyed, just like I told you they would be. You're being so afraid, but you shouldn't have been afraid because I told you not to be. And what's going to happen? And God will bring then, after he destroys those two nations, he will bring upon you and upon your nation and your house days that are so terrible, days that have been you have not seen such bad days, since the days of the split of the civil strife that led to the split of the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom. Eit melech Ashur, and from whom will the suffering come? It will come from the very king of Assyria, to whom you turned for help instead of turning to God. I'm going to lay out the issues and the questions that the commentaries have grappled with here. And then we will, with the next podcast, answer these. First of all, who is this young girl that Isaiah is referring to is going to give birth? The commentators between Rashi and the Radak and the Ibn Ezra, and you can search through the commentaries, they have understood this variably to mean maybe Yeshayahu himself had a young wife, which is unusual because there is no reference to Isaiah having another wife. We know that he had one, but she wouldn't have been considered an Alma, a young girl. But maybe he had another wife from whom she was going to have a son. Others have assumed that it was another young wife of Ahaz. Maybe King Ahaz had another young wife who was going to give birth. But who is this person, and why is she not referenced anywhere else? Why don't we know her name? Why don't we know anything about her? Second question, who is this boy Immanuel? God is with us. Many have tried to suggest that it refers to Chizkiyahu or Hezekiah, who was the son of Ahaz and was going to be the king after Ahaz, and he was going to be a good king. But chronologically, most of the commentaries point out that it can't be, as at the time of this prophecy, Hezekiah had to already have been born and had to already have been a young man. And the boy Immanuel doesn't show up anywhere else. Question 3. What is the miracle or sign that Yeshayahu is predicting? It seems like he's saying some miracle is going to happen to prove to you, Ahaz, that you should have followed God's instructions. What's the miracle? That a young girl will get pregnant? That's certainly not much of a miracle. That a young boy would be born? Also not much of a miracle. Some say, well, maybe the miracle was that he predicted it was going to be a boy and not a girl. Well, that's a 50-50 shot. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of a miracle, but not much. Some tried to explain that it means that he's going to show the wisdom to choose sweets over non-sweets, when he eats, before the age when children usually are able to know what tastes good and what doesn't. Okay, maybe, but that still doesn't sound very satisfying. That's still not much of a sign. So if you look through the commentaries, there are numerous attempts as to exactly what is this miracle or sign that God is predicting. Question 4, how does this prediction relate to the context? The story of the young girl and the son, Immanuel, it just doesn't seem to fit into the whole context of the chapters before and the chapters that are coming up. And number 5, how does this miracle teach Ahaz anything? Some boy being born to some girl who we don't even know who they are, teaching Ahaz and choosing to eat sweets, somehow teaches Ahaz that he shouldn't have capitulated to the king of Assyria. there's something missing here. There's something very big missing here. And that is what I'm going to address in the next podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to having you on the next podcast.